Hello and welcome to Unacademy IAS English, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. A very good morning and welcome to the daily Hindu news analysis. So let's begin today's discussion by first looking at the articles. From the Delhi edition of the Hindu, I have chosen 7 important articles. See, even on Sundays, many students tend to ignore the newspaper. But trust me, on Sundays, you actually get a number of interesting articles. So let's look at these topics and analyze them comprehensively so that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. And if you guys are liking our initiatives and benefiting from them, do support us with your likes and comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Now, before we start, I have a very important announcement. Unacademy recently marked its 9th anniversary, and following the success of the Unacademy group, we are glad to provide a massive discount on our IAS courses. Unacademy is providing up to 50% off with a free extension on your IAS courses. Since IAS preparation would include months of preparation and effort, you would need a subscription of at least 12 to 18 months. So to make this easier, Unacademy is providing the IAS online English classroom program at a discounted price of 50%. And if you subscribe before 17th December, this anniversary offer is up to 17th December, you will get a 9-month free extension on a 9-month subscription, and the same for 12 and 18 months. So this would give you access to all the online classes, the live lectures by our top educators, along with one-on-one mentorship and prelims mains test series, and also the study material. Now, the best part is that if you apply the code IAS English when you're subscribing to the program, you will get access to mentorship where you'll get in touch with our educators to resolve some of your doubts, some of your queries, etc. So don't forget to use the code IAS English to get in touch with our educators and for further discounts. So then, before we start, I would like to remind you that if you want the PDF of this session with the annotations, please join my Telegram channel, scan the QR code, and after the session ends, in some time, I'll share the PDF. And also join our official Telegram channel. For that, the link is in the description, because we conduct a daily quiz after the session ends. We'll give you enough practice MCQs based on these articles so that you can revise these topics and prepare for the upcoming prelims. With this, let's get started and look at this important column on page number 12. Recently, a motion was moved in the Rajya Sabha against the Vice President of India. Opposition parties have moved a motion for the removal of the Vice President, Shri Jagdeep Dhankar. Now, this is not quite unprecedented. There have been such instances where such motions have been pushed seeking the removal of the Vice President. So the media has often reported this as a no confidence motion or impeachment of the Vice President. But however, technically, they are incorrect because the Constitution doesn't really mention this process as a no confidence motion or as impeachment. The Constitution simply refers to this as the removal process of Vice President of India. So let's stick to what the Constitution says and not be driven by what's being reported or rather misreported in the media. So here we need to understand why the opposition is seeking the removal of the Vice President of India. What is the provisions provided in the Constitution regarding the Vice President, particularly with regard to the removal process? And let's understand the entire process itself. So the opposition parties have alleged that Vice President Jagdeep Dhankar has been highly biased towards the government, favoring the government in the Rajya Sabha. Because don't forget, the Vice President of India also becomes the chairman of Rajya Sabha, ex officio. The Constitution says that the Vice President ex officio becomes the chairperson of Rajya Sabha as well. So, someone who holds high constitutional offices such as President, Vice President, Governor, they're expected to rise above their political biases. Though they come from certain political parties, often from the ruling party or the ruling coalition, once they occupy these high constitutional offices, they are expected to rise above party politics and be as unbiased and neutral as possible, especially when they hold key positions in the parliament. For example, the vice president, as the chairman of Rajya Sabha, plays a critical role in the conduct of business in the Rajya Sabha. When bills are being debated, when questions are being raised against the government, the executive, when the opposition is trying to hold the executive accountable on the floor of the House in Rajya Sabha, the vice president, as the ex officio chairperson of Rajya Sabha, plays a critical role in allowing for these debates, in giving the space and time needed for the opposition to counter the government and to hold the government accountable. Now, this is a key part of parliamentary accountability. But quite often, such allegations come up, especially by the opposition parties, that vice president is not fair, is not neutral or unbiased. In the case of Jagdeep Dhankar, the opposition parties have said that he acts as if he is the spokesperson of the ruling coalition. So this is a serious charge, and the opposition has pushed for his removal as the Vice President of India. So let's understand what are the provisions. What does the Constitution say about the Vice President? Now, if you look at the order of precedence, the highest ranking functionary in the country would obviously be the President of India. Then comes the Vice President of India. So on the order of precedence, the Vice President is the second highest constitutional authority. So it is a high constitutional office without a doubt. Now, Article 63 of the Indian Constitution provides for the Vice President, defines the powers of the Vice President. Then you have Article 64, which provides for the ex officio role of the Vice President. Ex officio essentially means by virtue of holding a position, automatically you get to hold another position. So the Vice President ex officio becomes the chairman of Rajya Sabha. Now this is a critical role performed by the Vice President. Apart from the role mentioned under Article 63, apart from his role as the Vice President of India, as per Article 64, the Vice President ex officio becomes the chairman of Rajya Sabha and delivers a key parliamentary function. Now, when you look at the removal of Vice President, these provisions are contained under Article 67 of the Indian Constitution. Now, please make a note of these articles and the provisions that we are discussing. There could be prelims questions as well based on this. Under Article 67, the Vice President has been provided with a 5-year term, or the Vice President can even resign before the end of the term by submitting the resignation, obviously, to the President of India. Other than these two processes, a Vice President can be removed through a motion which is pushed in the Rajya Sabha and taken up later in the Lok Sabha as well. So in the Rajya Sabha, a motion can be initiated seeking the removal of the Vice President. If the MPs in Rajya Sabha feel that the Vice President, as the chairman of Rajya Sabha, is not delivering as per the constitutional mandate, so the opposition can push for a motion in the Rajya Sabha which seeks the removal of the Vice President. Now, once this motion is pushed, what happens next? For that, we need to look at Article 67 Clause B. Article 67 Clause B says that if majority of the members in Rajya Sabha bring about a resolution supporting the removal of Vice President, and if this resolution is passed in the Lok Sabha as well with a simple majority later, then the President will be bound to remove the Vice President. But however, once the motion is introduced and before the resolution can be taken up for discussion and voting, there has to be a mandatory 14-day notice. There has to be a mandatory notice period of 14 days, which gives time for the Vice President as well, against whom the charges are brought up, to defend themselves. So right now, the winter session of the Parliament is going on. So this motion seeking the removal of Vice President was pushed by the opposition on 10th December. Now this is yet to be accepted by the deputy chairman of Rajya Sabha. Since the motion is against the vice president, the chairman himself, the deputy chairman of Rajya Sabha will have to first accept the motion, right? So a minimum of 14-day notice, a mandatory 14-day notice period takes effect, which means it goes up to December 24th. But however, the winter session comes to an end on December 20th. So much before the 14-day notice period can be completed, because only then the resolution can be pushed in the Rajya Sabha. The resolution has to begin with the Rajya Sabha. So before the discussion and the voting takes place on this resolution, a 14-day notice has to be given, but this may not happen in the winter session as it ends on 20th December. But however, constitutional experts say that since this is a constitutional resolution, this will not lapse even if the House is prorogued. Even if the House is prorogued, the constitutional resolution will not lapse. It can still be taken up in the next session, or if required, even a special session can be convened. As it is a constitutional resolution, it does not lapse with the prorogation of the House, and it can be taken up in the next session, or a special session can also be convened. But the bigger question is, in the Rajya Sabha, then later in Lok Sabha, if at all the resolution is taken up for discussion and voting, does the opposition have the numbers to get a majority? Because the resolution has to be passed with a majority, a simple majority, both in Rajya Sabha and Lok Sabha. So if you look at the numbers, clearly the opposition doesn't have that kind of numbers in the parliament, especially in the Lok Sabha. So then what is the purpose of pushing this motion and seeking a resolution for the removal of vice president? The article feels that this is largely symbolic. The opposition knows that they can't secure the removal of the vice president simply because they don't have the numbers in the parliament. Even if deputy chairman accepts the motion and after the 14-day notice, let's say in the next session or in a special session, the resolution is taken up for the removal of vice president, right? Opposition parties do not have the numbers. Even if they somehow get the numbers in Rajya Sabha, definitely it will fail in the Lok Sabha. So most likely vice president will not be removed. So this is largely a symbolic move by the opposition to express their dissent and protest against the alleged biased approach of the vice president as the chairman of Rajya Sabha. So that is what we take away from this important article. Now, one last question. Now, when this resolution is brought up in Rajya Sabha itself for discussion and voting, the big question is, can vice president as the chairman preside over its hearing? Or let's say in Rajya Sabha, other discussions will be going on, other votings will be going on. Can the vice president, who is the ex officio chairman, can they preside over these discussions once there is a motion pushed again with regard to the removal of the vice president? So here the constitution is very clear. Article 92, it clearly prohibits the vice president from presiding over these discussions. Once there is a motion pushed against the chairman or deputy chairman of Rajya Sabha seeking their removal, once that motion has been introduced, they cannot preside over any such resolutions or discussions, and definitely they cannot vote. However, they can attend the session, they can debate, they can discuss, they can raise their voice, defend themselves as well. But they cannot vote and they cannot preside over any of the proceedings once the motion is accepted and introduced as per the constitutional provisions. So this is what you need to learn. So these points are more important for your prelims, and maybe there could be a simple mains question as well. So to conclude, the vice president may not be removed simply because of the fact that the opposition may not have the numbers, right? But this is largely a symbolic move to express their protest against the alleged bias of the chairman of Rajya Sabha. So take up this practice question, discuss the provisions for the removal of Vice President of India. A straightforward 10-mark question. Now let's look at the next article. On page 12, we have a very insightful article regarding what has happened in Syria and what could be the future of Syria. Now, we have discussed enough about this topic, right? We even did a special podcast where we analyzed the entire background, the developments of Syria. So I will not waste your time by going into that again. You can as well go and watch that video, right, which is available on our YouTube channel. I will just focus on the impact of these events, right? The Assad's removal, the toppling of Bashar al-Assad's regime. What would be its impact, the consequence on the region and other powers which have been impacted, and what could be the future of Syria? So let us take a look at this. Now, to understand what's happened in Syria and what might happen, you need to first know which group and which entity controls which part of the country. See, Syria at one point was a very stable country. Until 1971, Syria had witnessed many coups and counter-coups. Syria had gone through a long period of political instability because of repeated coups and counter-coups. But after 1971, Syria witnessed a lot of stability that was brought in by the Assad regime. Not Bashar al-Assad, but his father, Hafez al-Assad, from the Alawite sect, which is part of Shia Islam, who are in minority in Syria. So primarily the Shias, the Alawites, who have been the dominant ruling class, they are concentrated in the coastal areas of Syria, which faces the Mediterranean, that is over here, in this belt, around Damascus and towards the coastal belt, towards the Mediterranean. This is where the Alawite Shia community is found, which has been the stronghold of the Assad family. So Bashar al-Assad's father, Hafez al-Assad, who captured power in 1971, though was a dictator, authoritarian leader, managed to bring in stability and build strong institutions, stabilize the economy. Then his son Bashar al-Assad took over, and until 2011, everything was going well in the country. But with the Arab Spring movement that spread across Middle East, North Africa, it was a pro-democracy revolutionary movement that toppled many dictators from Tunisia to Egypt to Libya. Eventually, the Arab Spring movement hit Syria as well, where the opponents of Assad and especially some Sunni factions in southern and northwestern and eastern parts of Syria, who are in majority, they rebelled against the regime of Bashar al-Assad. A free Syrian army comprising of all dissidents and those who were targeted by Assad's regime during the authoritarian rule, right? They all formed these militias and they started this rebellion against Bashar al-Assad. So this rebellion which broke out was sponsored by outside powers as well. There are allegations that countries like Turkey, at some point countries like United States, Saudi Arabia, to an extent even Qatar and United Arab Emirates, have allegedly been involved in sponsoring some of these rebel factions, particularly the Free Syrian Army. So this has been a long-standing civil war. There was a point where Assad was about to lose control back in 2015 because terror entities or jihadist terror groups from neighboring Iraq had also spread their tentacles into Syria, especially factions of Al-Qaeda. They took root in Syria, which was known as Al-Nusra Front, which allegedly was sponsored by US and some of its allies, including to an extent Israel and some Sunni powers in the region, because their goal was to topple Assad's regime, as Assad was a close ally of Iran. Iran and Syria together represented the Shia power bloc, and Syria was crucial for Iran to provide supplies and support to Hezbollah that operates in neighboring Lebanon. So Iran's covert war in the region against Israel and against the Sunni powers, against US interests, right? It would depend on accessing Syria and Iraq. This is where different factions of Hezbollah were backed and supported by Iran, which was facilitated by the Assad regime in Syria. So naturally, US and its allies would see that they would like to target Syria and bring down Assad's regime in order to weaken the proxies of Iran, particularly Hezbollah. So this is a long-standing geopolitical rivalry in the region. So over years, we saw the rise of a new terror entity, ISIS or Islamic State, particularly in eastern parts of Syria and also in the western parts of Iraq. By 2015-2016, Islamic State had captured large tracts of territory in Iraq and Syria and even declared the so-called Islamic Caliphate. So later, there were external powers which intervened directly, carried out a military intervention. Russia in particular, Russia had a direct stake in this conflict because Russia has key military bases present in Syria, which gives it access to the Mediterranean Sea. For example, look at the map here. Can you see the Tartus naval base? A strategic naval base located in Syria, but owned and operated by Russia. So this allows Russia to project its influence into the Mediterranean. And of course, by extension, towards the Atlantic, which helps Russia to counter Western influence in the region. Russia even has an air base with military troops stationed in the country. And don't forget, Russia has always been a close ally of Assad's regime and a close ally of Iran. So this axis of Russia, Syria, Iran had a big role to play in this entire conflict. To ensure that Assad's regime was protected from the rebels and the militant terrorist groups, Russia carried out a direct military intervention starting from 2015-2016. Russia's airstrikes and military and intelligence operations played a critical role in weakening the rebels and in regaining the territory. And this is what helped Assad to regain control over most parts of Syria. Iran also played a critical role. Iran's IRGC would use the Hezbollah from Lebanon and Iraq, who would support Assad's regime. Factions of Hezbollah like Kataib Hezbollah, which is seen in Iraq, they came to the support of Bashar al-Assad. And the main Hezbollah from Lebanon, right? They also fought for Assad. It was this Russian and Iranian support, right? By using proxies like Hezbollah and direct military intervention, which had supported Assad's regime and it had managed to survive the conflict. Parallelly, ISIS, which had become a global threat, was targeted by United States. The US aligned with the Kurdish groups that are found in parts of Syria, Turkey, Iraq, and Iran. And the US in particular sponsored few Kurdish militias to target ISIS, and eventually ISIS was decimated and pushed into a small corner in Syria and Iraq. So this had been the situation. But if you come back to the conflict map, if you see which entities held which part of Syria, the Syrian government under Assad held control mainly near Damascus and some parts of central, northern, and southern Syria. But other than that, rest of the country was under the control of different militias, jihadist groups, and rebel factions. Now, the latest group which has toppled the Syrian regime, which has hit global headlines, is HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, a jihadist group which is nothing but a new version of al-Nusra. Al-Nusra previously was aligned with Al-Qaeda. It was seen as branch of Al-Qaeda in Syria. But its leader, Abu Muhammad al-Julani, he broke from Al-Qaeda and founded a new organization called HTS, primarily centered around Idlib in northwestern Syria. So for many years, HTS has been planning to topple Assad's regime and had been waiting for the golden opportunity. Now, HTS gets a lot of support from Syrian National Army, which is another rebel militia operating here in northern parts of Syria. This is nothing but a new version of the Free Syrian Army that comprised of the rebels who launched the civil war against Assad's regime in 2011. Now the question is, who supports the Free Syrian Army or Syrian National Army and who supports HTS? Reports indicate that it's largely Turkey which has been playing this role. For many years, Turkey has been trying to carve out its own influence in the region, and it has been trying to topple Assad's regime. Turkey has been a major regional power, just like Saudi Arabia, Iran. While Sunni Shia powers have had their own influence, Turkey, which has emerged as an aggressive power in the region under Recep Erdogan, has been trying to project its own influence. And Turkey has issues with Bashar al-Assad because Assad had granted autonomy to the Syrian Kurds. You can see the yellow shaded area here. These are the Kurd areas, right, where you find Kurdish groups such as the Syrian Democratic Forces. It includes Kurdish militias like YPG, People's Protection Units. It's a Kurdish militant organization based out of Syria, and they're part of the Syrian Democratic Forces. So Assad had given a limited autonomy to the Kurds, which was never liked by Turkey because Kurds are fighting for independence. There are Kurdish militant groups like PKK, which wage a separatist war against Turkey, seeking to break the Kurdish areas from Turkey to form a separate country called Kurdistan. So Turkey always wanted to wipe out the Kurdish groups and, of course, target Syria's regime, Assad's regime. So Turkey has been sponsoring the Free Syrian Army, which is now the Syrian National Army in the north, and the jihadist outfit, HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. So this was basically a new version of al-Nusra, which was previously backed by the US. So it's a very complex dynamic over here. But now the opportune time came up because of the Gaza war, where Israel has wiped out Hamas. Israel has weakened Iran through repeated military strikes and covert operations. Israel almost decimated Hezbollah in Lebanon, took out its entire leadership and its military capabilities. So essentially, the allies of Assad were at their weakest. Iran had been weakened and distracted. Hezbollah had been almost wiped out. More importantly, Russia has been distracted with the Ukraine war. So given that Syria's allies, Assad's allies, were at their weakest, this was the most opportune time for HTS to mount this final assault. So from Idlib, HTS quickly captured territory around Aleppo and across northwest Syria and marched towards Damascus. But it was not just HTS and the Syrian National Army backed by Turkey, but even from the south. In the south, there are few Sunni militant outfits which are backed by Jordan. Jordan is another major regional player, right? There are reports that Jordan was backing some of the militant organizations in the south which marched towards Damascus. So multiple rebel factions and militias and terror groups have collectively worked together to topple Assad's regime. So now it's a coalition of rebels who control Damascus, and there's no clarity as to what might happen next. ISIS remains a player because ISIS still has a limited presence in eastern parts of Syria. Plus, you have the Kurdish groups. Turkey has already been using the Syrian National Army, right? And it has been using them to target the Kurdish groups, which it sees as a threat. So, in the coming days, one possibility is that all these rebels, militias, under the leadership of HTS and Syrian National Army, they might form some sort of coalition. Because HTS has already shown an accommodative stance. It has stated publicly, even the leader, Al-Julani, has stated that they don't seek complete authoritarian control. They don't want to impose rigid religious codes and violate human rights or target other communities. So they have called for consultation with all stakeholders to form a future government that can administer Syria. Also, HTS and these jihadist groups have stated that they are not going to target the other communities. They might even welcome back the Syrian refugees who have left the country, especially the dissidents of Assad who had left the country fearing targeting and persecution, right? They are being welcomed back. So this might be good. It might help in reconciliation. It might help in addressing the complex social issues, right? And it might even bring about a new united front. But however, the likeliness of this is very limited because history again tells us that in any country where such complex dynamics are present, where rebellions, coups and such civil wars have taken place, usually things don't end very well. people might have celebrated the toppling of Assad's regime. But given that there are jihadist outfits, militias with their own interests and objectives, and regional external powers using all these entities, sponsoring them for their covert wars, things may not go out so smoothly. Look at what happened in Afghanistan. From 1979 to 1980s, the United States with Pakistan and some of its allies, they created the Afghan Mujahideen to target the Soviet forces which occupied Afghanistan in 1979. This Mujahideen insurgency, which was armed, backed and funded by US with Pakistan and others, eventually led to the overthrow of the Soviet troops and they were kicked out of Afghanistan. But after that, Afghanistan descended into chaos. A civil war broke out between different factions of the Mujahideen, between different warlords, and paved the way for the rise of Taliban, the more radical student-based political insurgent outfit. The Taliban would eventually capture power by 1996 and would even shelter terrorist organizations such as Al-Qaeda. So 20 years later, the Taliban is back in power again and the crisis in Afghanistan continues. Then look at what happened in Libya. Libya was a stable country, though ruled by a dictator, Muammar Gaddafi. The country was relatively stable, but the Arab Spring movement, which was misused by Western countries, US, UK and France and others, they sponsored the rebellion against Gaddafi's regime and even carried out a military intervention, which even led to the toppling of Gaddafi's regime, and eventually Gaddafi was killed. And Libya remains in a state of civil war. There is complete chaos in Libya, on the streets of Libya even today. It's been a decade of conflict in Libya. Look at what happened with Iraq. Following the controversial invasion of Iraq by US and UK. US and UK generated false intelligence, alleging that Saddam Hussein, the Iraqi dictator, was developing weapons of mass destruction. But eventually these claims were found to be false, and it was even established that these were fabricated reports by US and UK because they wanted to justify a regime change. They wanted to topple Saddam Hussein in Iraq. So, though they succeeded in toppling Saddam Hussein's regime, and eventually he was given the death punishment as well, right? And later US and UK troops withdrew. The country remains in a state of chaos and conflict. There are multiple factions which control parts of Iraq. There is no stability. There are terror groups that have flourished, from factions of Al-Qaeda to eventually the Islamic State. So there are numerous examples like this. Look at Yemen. After the toppling of the Yemeni government, the Houthis who have taken control have unleashed chaos, not just in Yemen, but across the region. So it's unlikely that stability is going to come back to Syria, given the complex nature of the conflict, given how many terrorist, militant rebel groups are involved, and how external powers are just exploiting them, utilizing them to serve their own agendas. So the point the writer is making here is that every actor, they have their own interests. The Americans have their interests, the Russians have their own interests, Iranians have their own interests, Israel has its own interest. Now, Israel has already capitalized on this opportunity created by the toppling of Assad's regime. Israel has carried out multiple military strikes, air strikes inside Syria, destroying most of the weapons, including chemical weapons and other long-range weapons, which potentially militants and terrorists might have used to target Israel. Israel has even captured the buffer zone next to the Golan Heights, which was monitored by a UN peacekeeping force. Israeli troops have captured this buffer zone bordering Syria and Golan Heights, which Israel has captured illegally back in 1967. So Israel has made rapid advances. Turkey would like to capitalize on this. Turkey, it has leverage with the Syrian National Army, with HTS. It would like to use these groups to further its influence. And this would clearly establish Turkey as a major regional power in the coming years and decades. And it will definitely lead to the weakening of Iran. Iran probably is at its weakest since 1979. Now, this could significantly alter the dynamics of entire West Asia. The Shia powers have been weakened, almost decimated. Hezbollah is almost wiped out. Assad's regime is gone. And Iran has faced repeated attacks from Israel, US, and Iran is under significant pressure. So, in essence, the entire geopolitics of West Asia might churn. It might take a different turn altogether. But will stability return to Syria? Will there be a stable government formed? Most likely it will not happen. Given that the complications involved here, right, it's unlikely to happen. Now, Iran's biggest concern would be losing access to Hezbollah, right, especially providing support to Hezbollah in Lebanon. Syria's territory was crucial. Now, look at the map here. Iran had free access to Iraq, and that's why factions of Hezbollah like Kataib Hezbollah could be easily sponsored by Iran. But without Syria, without Assad, running these logistics and providing supplies to Hezbollah, giving funds, weapons to Hezbollah might become more difficult and challenging, which might further weaken Iran's influence. So this is what we need to understand, because these are key developments which can impact the entire region, impact India's interests as well. So we will continue to track this story. So we just wanted to discuss the current situation, what might happen next, and how different players who are involved in the conflict are affected by these developments. So please take up this practice question. How was HTS able to defeat Syrian armed forces? Why did priorities of Syria's greatest allies, Russia and Iran, change in recent years? What has been the role of Turkey in the fall of the Syrian president? Now let's look at another important article which is related to internal security. This article is focused on all the new cyber scams, the frauds which are happening on a massive scale. Not just in India, but across the world. People are receiving these fraudulent calls, WhatsApp messages or Telegram messages, urging them to invest in crypto schemes or in stock markets, right? Or they are threatened with a digital arrest, or they are lured into a honey trap using fake accounts, right? And later they are blackmailed or they are defrauded by promising them massive returns through stock investments or crypto investments. So many such scams and frauds have been occurring on a massive scale, and Indians in particular have been losing a lot of money to these scamsters. So from digital frauds to investment scams to romance traps or honey traps, this has become a nightmare for Indians, especially those who are not aware of such cyber scams and frauds. Now, if you have ever noticed, those who call, those who message, right, it appears that they are Indian on the other side, right? They can speak Indian languages from Hindi to Tamil to Kannada or Telugu, right? Or they can easily strike a conversation. They'll have some of your details as well, right? So how is this possible? This is possible because the entire scam ring is largely being operated from the Golden Triangle. The Golden Triangle is a notorious region in Southeast Asia, stretching across Myanmar, Laos, Cambodia, and Thailand. See, historically, these countries, this entire junction of these countries called the Golden Triangle, it has been a hub of organized crime. From drug trafficking to arms trafficking, to even human trafficking and wildlife trafficking. They have been rampant in the region. All these criminal activities have been in turn connected with money laundering, terrorist financing. So no wonder many insurgent groups operating here in Myanmar, in Northeast India, in Thailand, they have got easy support from this region because they can access drugs, or they can traffic drugs for a commission, procure the arms required. So this has been a major security concern, especially for India, since we share a long border with Myanmar. These threats from across the border often cross into India, and Northeast insurgents in particular have depended on the cross-border support. Now, other than these traditional organized crimes, the Golden Triangle region, particularly Myanmar and Laos, these two countries, they emerged as a hub for gambling, multiple casinos came up, which were largely operated by the Chinese mafia. Chinese warlords and criminal gangs, they started dominating this region by opening these casinos, gambling centers, and such gambling scams started breaking out in the region. Now, eventually, this has turned more sophisticated. From simple gambling and gambling-related scams, now they have graduated towards cyber scams and online frauds. These criminal organizations linked with the Chinese mafia that operate in Myanmar and Laos, they are running these massive call centers, which looks like almost like a IT park, like a tech park, right? They're also referred to as these scam compounds. If you were to visit one of these scam compounds, right, you'll not believe that such scams are being carried out from here. It looks like a modern industrial park or a huge special economic zone or a IT tech park or a industry. But inside, most of those who are involved, they are being used by these mafias and criminal gangs to dupe the targets in India and around the world. In fact, in Laos, investigations have unraveled the presence of a SEZ, ironically named as Golden Triangle SEZ itself. It is inside this SEZ that multiple scam compounds are present. It appears as if it's a massive luxury tech park with all hotels, massage parlors, shopping malls and shopping centers, right, with these so-called call centers and IT companies. But these are all fraudulent companies essentially. So there is an entire nexus involved here. These mafias operating here, the criminal gangs, they work with human traffickers based out of countries like India. And they are luring the youth who are looking for jobs, who are desperate to get a job, especially who are aspiring for a foreign job abroad. So these traffickers, the middlemen, the agents, they take a lot of money from unsuspecting youth, from Punjab to Tamil Nadu to Andhra Pradesh to Haryana, across India. Thousands of Indian youth, right, have been lured by these human traffickers and middlemen. They have taken anywhere between 2 lakhs to 5 lakh rupees, promising them a job in Southeast Asia. Eventually, they'll get them a visa, they'll get their tickets booked, and they promise that they have got a job in Thailand or Vietnam. So the unsuspecting youth, right, who may have limited education, limited awareness, right, they get excited, they think they got a real job in a foreign country, and they leave India, usually to Thailand or let's say Vietnam or sometimes Cambodia. But once they land here, the mafias, which have a wide network across the region, they often kidnap them or they trick them and take them across the border into Laos or sometimes into Myanmar or sometimes into Cambodia. So once they are brought into these scam compounds, their passports are confiscated. The passports are confiscated. They are even mistreated. They are threatened. They are abused. They are beaten up as well. There have been many cases where Indians have reported horror stories. They are deprived of food. They are forced to go hungry as a form of punishment if they don't meet their targets. They are lashed by their controllers if they don't meet the targets that they are given. They are forced to identify targets, specifically those who speak local vernacular languages, focus on specific regions, right? So by using Indian youth, right, who can obviously speak the local language where they come from, they specifically target those victims on whom they have some data. So either they would already have your name, basic biometric details, or maybe some of your identification documents, your credit card details, or it could be your Aadhaar number, your PAN number, right, which has been scored through the dark net. There has been a lot of data theft, right, and a lot of the data would have been sold on the dark net. So these criminal mafias would have accessed the data, and using specific information, they target their victims to lure them, to dupe them, either to make them invest in these fraudulent schemes, or push them to reveal their OTPs or net banking details, right? So that they can defraud their bank accounts or lure them into a honey trap, catch them in compromising positions and then blackmail them, or convince them that they're under digital arrest, saying that they're calling from customs or enforcement directorate or CBI, and they get on a video call, right, depicting a police station, and the person on the other side looks like a police officer, dressed like a police officer. So many people fall prey to this. Recently, for example, an old person from Bengaluru, right, who was not aware of such scams, fell prey to this and lost close to 2 crore rupees. Right? They placed him under a digital arrest. He actually thought he had been arrested because his bank account allegedly was linked with a money laundering scandal. He believed whatever the scamsters were saying on a video call, because on the other side, he saw a police officer, someone who looked like a police officer with like a police station kind of a background. And he was tricked not to contact anyone, to isolate himself, that he has been arrested by the police digitally. And they convinced him to transfer close to 2 crore rupees. And basically the person has lost his entire life savings. So recently, the government of India has brought out the data as well. According to data, close to 29 to 30,000 Indians might still be trapped in these countries. We have already rescued around 1,000 to 2,000 Indians. The Indian embassy is working here. They have been working hard to bring them back safely. And some of them have been rescued. Some of them have escaped as well. But immigration data shows at least another 29 to 30,000 are trapped. And the scams have reached alarming levels. The Ministry of Home Affairs, the I4C, which focuses on cybersecurity coordination, right? They estimate that the losses are running to thousands of crores because of all these scams and frauds. So acting against these criminal organizations has become a priority for law enforcement and intelligence agencies. India's NIA has been coordinating with CBI. They are cracking down on these human trafficking rings operating in India, who are duping our youth and pushing them into these scam compounds, right? So several cases have been filed, several arrests have already happened. We are closely working with Interpol. Interpol is playing a big role in bringing down these criminal mafias, right? So this is a developing story again, and currently a pressing issue as far as cybersecurity is concerned. Now let's take a quick look at the remaining articles and close the session for today. On page 9, we have an article related to the proposed free trade agreement between India and European Union. The topic is in news because the foreign minister of Portugal is on a visit to India. By the way, India, Portugal, they are preparing to celebrate 50 years of their diplomatic relations next year. Next year will complete the 50th anniversary of our diplomatic ties. It's just 50 years of diplomatic ties between India and Portugal, because initially from 1950s to 1970s, India-Portugal had cut off their diplomatic relations because both the countries had fought a limited conflict, a limited war. Portugal had cut off all ties with India following India's attempt to retake Goa from Portuguese colonization. Portugal back then was under a dictatorship, Antonio Salazar, who refused to decolonize and grant independence and merge Goa with India. This forced India to use military force under Operation Vijay. And in a tri-service operation, India quickly defeated the Portuguese forces and kicked out the Portuguese. So as a result, India became the only country to have ever attacked a NATO country without any impact, without any threat from the other NATO powers. Of course, Western countries did put pressure on India. They all sided with Portugal, but thanks to the support we got from USSR, India sailed through this crisis. And for many years, India and Portugal were very hostile to each other in the 1950s and 60s. It was only after the fall of Salazar's regime and after Portugal turned into a democracy, only then India and Portugal became good friends. And now we are marking the 50th anniversary. So the foreign minister of Portugal, who's in India, he has urged India to quickly wrap up the negotiations of the free trade agreement with the European Union, because Portugal is a key member of the EU. Now, what is this free trade agreement between India and EU? This proposed free trade agreement is known as BTIA, Broad-Based Trade and Investment Agreement. We started the negotiations back in 2007. Imagine, it's been 17 years since the negotiation started, and still we haven't signed the final FTA, which clearly means there have been problems, there have been delays. In fact, it had stopped, the negotiations had come to a complete stop, and it was resumed recently in 2022. So we need to understand what are the problems that led to the delay in the finalization of this FTA. We should also understand why an FTA is crucial between India and European Union. See, the EU is one of the largest markets for Indian exports. If you take EU into account with other countries that we trade with, the EU ranks as India's largest trading partner, even above China and United States. If you exclude EU, look at only countries, then China, US are the top two trading partners for India. When you include EU as well as the entire region, the EU becomes our largest trading partner with a bilateral trade volume of $134 billion. That's a massive number, right? Even with US and China, the bilateral trade volume is above $100 billion. So clearly the EU is a critical market. A lot of exports from India are headed towards the EU. We have some key imports as well from EU, and also the EU is a key source of investments into India. There are many Indian companies as well with investments in the European market. So to reduce the trade barriers, to simplify the tariff and non-tariff barriers, and to facilitate smooth trade, easy flow of goods, investments, and even people through simplified visa immigration policies, it is a priority for the two sides to have a FTA between them. That's the purpose of a free trade agreement, to basically reduce or remove the tariff and non-tariff barriers and provide for free movement as much as possible for goods, services, investments, and even people. So this could benefit Indian traders and exporters, create millions of jobs in the country. It could benefit Indian students and workers as well, right? If the visa immigration norms are simplified. But however, when it comes to negotiating an FTA, we quite often face problems with developed countries. When it comes to trade issues, developing and developed countries, they have a few conflicts. For example, developed countries will expect very high standards of sanitation and hygiene. When it comes to agricultural products or pharmaceutical products, for example. Now, these are major exports for a country like India. They expect very high hygiene, sanitation, and phytosanitary standards, which may not be possible for small Indian companies to follow, because most of our producers are in the MSME sector. They're all medium, small, micro enterprises, right? They can't really match up to the Western developed standards when it comes to hygiene and phytosanitary measures. So this becomes a challenge for countries like India. They expect very stringent implementation of the IP regime, the intellectual property regime. But this may not be possible for a developing country, because there will be certain technologies or processes which have a critical application, like for example, life-saving drugs. We can't simply enforce strict IP and increase the prices and make them unaffordable to our poor population. So this becomes a major challenge, the question of enforcement of IP rights. Then also with regard to environmental standards, labor standards, these countries expect very high standards, which may not be possible for a developing nation like India to follow. This would increase the cost of operation as well for Indian companies. So major differences will come up over here. Developed countries will also expect a harmonization of certain laws and policies and regulations, like competition laws, merger and acquisition laws. And this is where a developing nation like India will face it, will see this as a very difficult compromise. We have already experienced a bitter trade relationship with ASEAN countries after we signed an FTA with the ASEAN group. The India-ASEAN FTA has hurt India's domestic producers. Our domestic industries, our farmers have taken a hit because of the flood of cheaper imports from ASEAN market into the Indian market. So India has complaints about the ASEAN FTA. We even quit RCEP on similar grounds. India quit RCEP negotiations, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, the world's largest free trade agreement covering multiple Indo-Pacific countries, right? It includes China, Australia, Japan, Southeast Asian countries, etc. India quit the negotiations on the very same grounds that we can't match these standards. It might adversely affect our domestic producers, our farmers, our industries, our MSME sector. So this is something that we have faced with European Union as well, right? And as a result, we have not been able to finalize the FTA. There has been a long delay, and we have resumed the talks in 2022, and there might be some progress. So the Portuguese foreign minister has urged India to speed up the talks and quickly sign the FTA so that both sides can benefit from it. Because recently the EU has signed an FTA with Mercosur. Mercosur is a South American common market. The South American countries have a common market, a common trade area under the Mercosur arrangement. Now, EU and Mercosur countries have signed a FTA, which is a very big development. So, on similar lines, if India-EU can finalize the BTIA, Broad-Based Trade and Investment Agreement, it could boost the bilateral trade, facilitate more investments. But however, India cannot sign this without addressing the core concerns of India as a developing nation. Now, coming to the next article, we have an update regarding what we studied yesterday. Yesterday, I told you that Switzerland has withdrawn the MFN status which was granted to India. We understood that MFN is a reciprocatory trade preference system extended under the provisions of WTO. Now, India and Switzerland had extended MFN status to each other, and we even had a double taxation avoidance agreement which had been signed to facilitate investments and the companies of India and Switzerland to pay minimum taxes, right? So one concern was, in the case of India, India could not provide the tax benefit to Swiss companies like Nestle, for example, because the concerned authority in India, the Competition Commission of India and as well as the IT department, they levied higher taxes, which basically meant double taxation, and it was challenged by Swiss companies including Nestle. Multiple petitions were filed at the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court ruled against the Swiss companies because the Supreme Court argued that since India had not notified the tax exemption under the IT Act, they cannot retrospectively claim the tax benefit. See, under the double taxation avoidance agreement, Indian and Swiss companies operating in each other's countries, they enjoy a tax benefit. They have to pay only hardly 5% of taxes on the interest and dividends that they make. But without this benefit, the taxes will go up to 10% and above, which can be significant for these companies. So Swiss companies were affected by the non-implementation of the DTAA clauses, where they were not given the tax relief. And when they approached Supreme Court, the Supreme Court rejected their petitions. The Supreme Court said India had not notified the tax exemption under IT Act, so these companies are liable even retrospectively. Whereas Indian companies in Switzerland enjoy the benefit. They pay only 5% taxes as far as dividends and interest and other incomes are concerned. So since it's not reciprocative, and since only Indian companies were enjoying the benefit and Swiss companies were at a disadvantage, Switzerland has decided to withdraw the MFN status, meaning Switzerland will not give the same treatment for Indian companies. So yesterday we discussed that this might cost the Indian companies, and Indian companies in Switzerland may have to pay more taxes. But now the Foreign Ministry has clarified, Ministry of External Affairs, that this may not immediately impact Swiss companies in India or Indian companies in Switzerland. India has said it will not even affect the EFTA trade agreement that we signed, the TEPA, the Trade and Economic Partnership Agreement, which is a FTA that we have signed recently with EFTA countries. The European Free Trade Association consists of 4 countries from Europe: Switzerland, Norway, Liechtenstein and Iceland. These 4 countries, which are not part of European Union, right? They signed a separate FTA with India, and under this trade agreement, the TEPA, they have committed to $100 billion investment into India that will create 1 million+ jobs. This is a commitment that EFTA countries have made under the Trade and Economic Partnership Agreement, which is a FTA that we signed with EFTA countries. So concern came up that whether this trade deal will be affected. Now that Switzerland has withdrawn MFN status, will Switzerland continue with its commitment? Will they really provide the $100 billion investment they have promised? So India is of the opinion that this decision of Switzerland will not affect the trade agreement we have signed with EFTA countries. Although India will renegotiate the MFN status with all these countries, including Switzerland, and India is confident that the impact of this would be limited, right? Because now if India and Switzerland work out a mechanism to restore the MFN or to revise the double taxation avoidance agreement, they should be able to tide over the crisis without affecting each other's companies. So the MEA is confident that these changes will not affect Indian companies in Switzerland. They don't have to pay more taxes. Similarly, Swiss companies in India will not face any extra liability. But again, this is just an assurance from the Indian side. We need to see how things will develop, whether there will be a renegotiation of the TEPA trade agreement with EFTA countries. Now, how will the decision of Switzerland to revoke MFN for India, how will it affect the trade agreement that we have signed with EFTA countries? So with this, we have completed all the big topics. Now let's take a quick look at a couple of articles relevant for prelims. On page 12, the Hindu carries an article related to Haemophilia A. Haemophilia is a deadly genetic disorder. There are two types of hemophilia, type A and type B. And those who suffer from hemophilia, basically their blood doesn't clot like a normal person because they suffer from a genetic defect. The clotting factor which should be present in the blood would be missing in those people, and as a result, their blood doesn't coagulate, it doesn't clot, and that exposes them to a serious life-threatening risk. There could be these bleeding episodes, or if they, let's say, suffer accidents or go through surgeries, the bleeding may never stop and it could even turn fatal for those who have hemophilia. It is a very rare genetic condition. It arises because the genetic defect which is noted is that they will be missing clotting factor 8, which causes Haemophilia A. Or if they miss clotting factor 9, this causes Haemophilia B. Type A, type B. So it depends on which clotting factor is missing, whether it's clotting factor 8 or clotting factor 9. So this is a genetic defect carried on the X chromosome, passed down generations. So there are few therapies available. For example, there is a replacement therapy, which is a traditional therapy. In replacement therapy, basically the blood is drawn to isolate the clotting factor from other healthy people, and this is injected through intravenous methods to provide the required clotting factor so that those who have hemophilia can at least develop some level of clotting ability. So replacement therapy is a lifelong therapy. So it's quite painful. You have to go through the process regularly. It might end up costing more, but it will never address the genetic root cause. There are other forms of treatment, such as using desmopressin, DDAVP, which is a man-made hormone. This has been quite effective in treating mild cases of type A hemophilia, where it provides the clotting ability to those who have type A hemophilia, that is, if they are missing clotting factor 8. But these are never long-lasting solutions, right? So, of late, gene therapy has become the buzzword to deal with genetic defects and disorders and such rare genetic mutations. Gene therapy has been a life-saving therapy which has come up. So in the US, there is one form of gene therapy which has been approved by the US FDA, especially to handle patients who have hemophilia. So one drug which has been approved, one gene therapy rather which has been approved is Roctavian. Roctavian, it's based on an adenovirus. It's an inactivated adenovirus. It uses the virus vector method, right? So this essentially is introduced into the liver cell of the patient so that the liver will start identifying the required clotting factor, particularly clotting factor 8 for those who suffer from hemophilia type A. And it helps them to develop the required clotting factor. The cells from the liver itself start identifying the defect, right? And this adenovirus-based gene therapy will help in decreasing the bleeding rate. It help improve the coagulation ability, and it trains the other genes, right, in the cells to develop similar abilities. But this is very expensive. It's cost prohibitive. It will cost at least $2 to $3 million, several crores of rupees, right? Though it is available in India as well under specialized treatment and hospitals. It's a very, very expensive therapy costing several crore rupees. But also the effectiveness is not great. It's not that it will completely reverse the condition. It only reduces the bleeding rate, and it's also not long lasting. Because once your immune system gets activated, right, our bodies would have been used to adenoviruses. They detect that as a foreign body, and the immune system starts fighting against it. So once antibodies are released, the effectiveness of Roctavian goes down. That's why with Roctavian, corticosteroids are used to suppress your immune system, to ensure that the gene therapy lasts for a longer time and it's more effective. So this is not the best option available. Now this is where Indian researchers have made a massive breakthrough. In Vellore, the popular hospital in Vellore, and the researchers working there have developed a new form of therapy, a gene therapy again, but using lentivirus as a vector, as a base. Because see, humans, we are exposed to adenoviruses. Naturally, our immune system will detect and react to it, and it will suppress the gene therapy itself. So it will not be effective. Whereas lentivirus is not very common. Getting exposed to lentivirus is very, very rare. So our immune systems don't know that they have to fight back. So if there is a therapy that uses lentivirus as a vector to deliver the required clotting factor, then this is more effective. And it has been clinically tried and tested in a study conducted in Vellore. Some of the patients who are part of the study, they have shown remarkable improvement with no side effects, with almost no side effects. And instead of just focusing on training the liver, this version that has been developed in India, it trains all the cells in the body to develop the clotting ability. So this has been quite effective, but however, this also remains very expensive. It will take at least 2 to 3 crore rupees for you to get the therapy done, because there will be multiple sessions lasting over around 10 years time period. So this is where government intervention becomes necessary, because data shows up to 1 lakh hemophilia patients are present in the country, right? So to improve their quality of life and to pull them away from this life-threatening risk, it's important to make the treatment affordable. The treatment is available now, right? So it's about affordability. Most people, in fact, cannot afford the cost of treatment when it costs 2-3 crore rupees and above, right? So it's important for the government to step in and make sure that it becomes more accessible and affordable. Coming to the last article, it's not directly relevant for the exam, as in you can't get a question from here, but this is more for those students who always say that, sir, I can't make notes, I don't have the habit of writing, I struggle to make my own notes. Is it really important to make notes? So there is a very interesting article in the Science and Tech page. I think all of you should take this as very serious advice. Studies have clearly established that handwriting, when you write with your hand, the more you write, the more it triggers the neurons and the brain networks that are linked with learning and memory. Have you ever wondered why you would remember things better in your school days? Again, if your school put that effort, if your teachers put that effort in inculcating the habit of writing in you, or if your parents would have done that, right, for sure, they would have encouraged you to write more. So writing, the very act of writing, will automatically trigger those parts of the brain associated with learning and memory. This is not just a speculation. There are scientific studies that establish that. So this is an advice for all UPSC students out there. If you want to recollect more, right, because this is a very vast field of study that we are in. You're dealing with a very vast syllabus, a lot of things to recollect and remember. Current affairs keeps coming up every single day. So make it a habit to write every day. If not everything, at least the key points. When you're listening to a class, make short notes. When you're reading current affairs, right, keep a separate book, maybe subject-wise book, and make some pointers. Because the more you write, it triggers those parts of your brain which are associated with learning and memory and helps in better recollection. Studies have shown that kids who write when they learn a language, right, they learn more quickly, they adapt, and they learn multiple languages. But those who don't write, they struggle with remembering. Especially today's generation, right, which has grown up using computers, mobile phones. They start typing most of the things. Typing will not have the same effect, and the studies have proven that. That's why I tell all the students, when you send in answers, for example, when you write answers, don't just type it or copy paste answers and put up your answers on a computer. That doesn't really help you. You have to write at the end of the day, right? The more you write, it triggers those parts of your brain linked with learning and memory. So that's one advice that you can take from today's Hindu newspaper. So with this, I bring my discussion to an end. I hope you guys have liked the session, understood everything. And if you did, please let me know in the comments and do press the like button. So we'll see you tomorrow. Till then, take care. Have a good day.